The arena was full, but it sounded hollow, like the building itself was holding its breath. Crowd noise rolled unevenly, pockets of cheers dissolving into silence without warning. Commentary tried to fill the gaps, voices low, careful, almost apologetic. They spoke about schedules, expectations, anything but what everyone felt pressing against their chest. The lights stayed normal. No dramatic cue arrived. A match ended without celebration, a referee raising an arm that barely anyone acknowledged. Cameras drifted awkwardly, lingering too long on faces that didn't know how to react yet. Something felt late or early or wrong. A chant attempted to start and died halfway through, replaced by a murmur that sounded like confusion rather than anticipation. The commentators paused, then resumed, then paused again, as if listening to something the audience couldn't hear. In the ring, the ropes vibrated from movement that had already passed, a reminder that the show was continuing, even if belief wasn't. A production assistant crossed the ramp and disappeared, unnoticed, like a mistake being quietly corrected. The crowd settled into an uneasy rhythm, clapping at inappropriate moments, booing nothing, cheering without conviction. Time stretched. Minutes felt longer than usual. Then the music hit. Not loud, not triumphant, just familiar enough to sting. It didn't explode. It crept. The first note slid across the arena and stopped conversations mid-sentence. Heads turned slowly, not jumping, not celebrating. Commentary fell silent entirely. The camera hesitated before cutting to the entrance, as if unsure it was allowed to look. When the figure stepped into view, there was no pose, no confidence, just a walk, measured and heavy. Eyes fixed forward like someone entering a room they weren't sure would accept them. The reaction wasn't loud, it fractured. Gasps, boos, stunned quiet, a few cheers that felt immediately ashamed. The name wasn't said. Nobody wanted to be first. The return didn't feel earned or stolen. It felt intrusive. SmackDown continued, but the air had changed, and everyone knew they were already watching something they couldn't take back. Even the screens seemed dimmer, replaying angles nobody asked for, avoiding close-ups that might force clarity. Security gathered near the ramp, not aggressive, just present, hands folded, eyes uncertain. A child in the front row covered their ears, though nothing was loud. Somewhere backstage, someone exhaled too loudly into a headset. The ring announcer stood frozen, card lowered, waiting for instruction that didn't come. Every step toward the ring sounded amplified, boots echoing like footsteps in an empty hallway. The crowd followed each movement with suspicion, as if proximity might confirm something they hoped was false. Commentary finally returned, voices brittle, choosing neutral words that explained nothing. They described what was visible, not what it meant. By the time the figure reached the apron, the arena had stopped reacting altogether. Silence settled. This was not a moment built for memory packages or highlight reels. It was a presence. It asked no permission, arrived, and the night bent around it. Backstage, the monitors showed the same image from 3 angles, none of them clarifying what it meant. Talent stopped walking. Conversations ended mid-word. A producer whispered into a headset, then removed it, as if hearing the answer would make things worse. No one was celebrating. No one was panicking either. It was something quieter than both. The locker room door closed harder than necessary, the sound echoing down the hallway. Someone laughed once, short and nervous, and immediately stopped. The returning figure stood in the ring without speaking, hands resting on the ropes, shoulders rising and falling slower than the crowd expected. Commentary tried again, voices lower now, choosing distance over certainty. They talked about shock, about unpredictability, about moments that changed the feeling of a place. They avoided names. The audience reacted in fragments. A section booed loudly, almost angrily, as if trying to push the moment away. Another section stayed completely silent, arms folded, eyes narrowed. A few fans cheered, then looked around, embarrassed when they realized they were alone. The camera cut 2 faces instead of the ring, searching for permission to react. A veteran watched from the curtain, jaw tight, hands taped but unmoving. A younger talent asked if the segment was real or a mistake. No one answered. In the ring, the microphone waited untouched. The pause stretched so long it became uncomfortable. People shifted in their seats. Someone yelled a question that wasn't caught on camera. The returning figure finally lifted the microphone, then lowered it again. That hesitation changed everything. It wasn't confidence. It wasn't fear. It was awareness. The crowd felt it immediately. This wasn't a promo. This was exposure. When the voice finally came, it was quieter than expected, forcing people to lean in. No catchphrase, no greeting, just an acknowledgement that they knew how this looked, that they knew how it felt. The words didn't ask for forgiveness or provoke anger. They sat in the middle, heavy and unresolved, backstage. A phone buzzed nonstop with messages from people not in the building. Social media clips spread faster than explanations. Family member watched from home, expression unreadable, knowing this moment would follow them everywhere now. The speech ended abruptly. No punctuation, no pause. The microphone dropped, not slammed, just released. The sound echoed longer than it should have. Security moved closer, unsure why. The figure exited the ring without looking at the crowd, walking past signs that had been made years ago and brought back out of storage. The mixed reaction followed them up the ramp like a shadow that couldn't decide its shape. Commentary tried to summarize and failed. They admitted they didn't know what this meant for SmackDown. They admitted it felt different. As the show cut to commercial, the camera caught one last image. A wrestler backstage staring at the monitor, eyes wet, whispering that some doors should stay closed once they're shut. The show moved on, but nobody believed it. Matches happened in front of an audience that was physically present and emotionally elsewhere. Every near fall landed flat. Every entrance felt smaller by comparison. Backstage, agents argued in hushed voices about timing, about damage control, about whether this was supposed to feel this uncomfortable. A locker room split quietly, not into sides, but into distances. Some wrestlers kept their heads down, taping wrists longer than necessary, avoiding eye contact. Others spoke too loudly, forcing bravado into the space as if volume could overwrite discomfort. One veteran sat alone, boots off, staring at the floor, remembering conversations that had ended badly years ago. Another slammed a locker shut and said this wasn't what the brand stood for anymore, then immediately questioned whether it ever had. The returning figure was escorted past them without ceremony, no confrontation, no welcome. Just nods that meant nothing. Media calls flooded in before the show even ended. Public relations drafted statements that explained nothing while sounding responsible. Phones buzzed with questions nobody could answer yet. Was this permanent? Was this a test? Was this an apology disguised as opportunity? The returning figure sat in a quiet room, hands clasped, breathing steady, feeling the weight settle in. This wasn't adrenaline, it was consequence. They thought about family members who would wake up tomorrow to headlines instead of peace. They thought about the version of themselves that had left, and whether that person would recognize who they were now. On the monitor, the crowd was shown again, still divided, still restless. No chant had survived longer than a few seconds all night. Commentary grew more cautious as the hours passed, choosing words like complex and uncomfortable instead of excitement. A producer asked if the final segment needed to change. Another said it was too late. The damage was already done, or already begun. When the show went off the air, the usual release didn't come. No dark match celebration, no loose smiles. Fans filed out slower than normal, talking in low voices, arguing quietly, checking their phones for validation. Outside, opinions hardened into extremes before context could catch up. Inside, the returning figure walked alone to their car, passing crew members who pretended to be busy. The night air felt heavier than the arena lights. Somewhere nearby, another wrestler sat with their head in their hands, realizing the path ahead had shifted without their consent. SmackDown had survived scandals, returns, betrayals, but this felt different. This felt personal. It wasn't about storylines anymore. It was about trust. As the trucks packed up and the building emptied, one question lingered without an answer. Not whether the return should have happened, but whether anyone would ever feel the same way watching again. By morning, the story had already escaped the building. Headlines didn't agree on what had happened, only that it had happened at all. Some framed it as bravery, others as recklessness, most as something unfinished. The company issued a statement that said very little and was read far too closely. Backstage, people arrived early, not to train, but to talk. Meetings were called that solved nothing. Veteran questioned whether locker room leadership still meant anything. A younger wrestler wondered aloud if silence was safer than honesty now. No one answered directly. The returning figure stayed away from the common areas, instructed or instinctive. It didn't matter, as their name sat in the air anyway. A family member called, voice calm but tired, asking if this was worth reopening wounds that had barely healed. The question lingered long after the call ended. Social media didn't slow down. Clips replayed the hesitation, the quiet, the lack of resolution. Fans argued with strangers, as if proximity to the moment granted authority. Sponsors asked careful questions. Executives measured reaction without showing preference. SmackDown's identity felt suddenly negotiable. The returning figure was offered opportunities that sounded like tests, a sit-down interview, a follow-up appearance, a chance to explain. None of them promised relief. I sat alone later, watching the segment back for the first time, noticing details they hadn't felt in the moment. The way the crowd leaned away instead of forward, the way commentary avoided certainty, the way the silence landed harder than boos ever could. Regret didn't arrive dramatically. It came in pieces. In memories of locker room jokes that wouldn't exist anymore. In the knowledge that some bridges were now permanently visible, even if they hadn't fully burned. Another wrestler crossed paths with them in the hallway, paused, then spoke honestly. They said this didn't just change one career, it changed how safe the room felt. The words weren't cruel. They were worse. They were accurate. As the next SmackDown approached, anticipation felt different. Not excitement, not dread, vigilance. The returning figure prepared anyway, lacing boots slower than usual, knowing the ring wouldn't feel the same under their feet. This wasn't about being accepted or rejected. It was about being remembered correctly. Somewhere in the production truck, an editor flagged the segment as sensitive, uncertain how often it should be replayed. History had a way of flattening nuance, and everyone knew it. The question now wasn't whether the return would continue. It was whether the cost had already been paid by people who never agreed to it, and whether anyone could admit that out loud. SmackDown returned the following week under the same lights, but nothing behaved the same way. The camera lingered longer, the commentary spoke softer, and the crowd arrived already arguing with itself. Signs were fewer. Reactions were delayed. When the returning figure's music did not hit, a strange relief moved through the building, followed immediately by disappointment that surprised people who felt it. Absence had become its own statement. Backstage, wrestlers watched the opening segment with guarded eyes, aware that any reaction could be interpreted as alignment. The locker room felt provisional, like trust had been placed on a short contract. No one said the name out loud. It didn't need to. It existed between sentences. Later in the night, the returning figure appeared only briefly, not for a match, not for confrontation, but standing at the edge of the stage, half lit, half hidden. The crowd reacted in fragments again. Some booed out of habit, some cheered out of loyalty. Most waited. The figure did not step forward. He looked at the ring as if measuring distance that could not be crossed tonight. Commentary acknowledged the presence without framing it. No promises were made. No direction offered. The moment ended without closure, and the show moved on, dragging the uncertainty with it. After the broadcast, emails circulated internally about brand perception and long-term implications. None of them mentioned the human cost directly. A wrestler packed their bag and wondered whether honesty still had a place here. Another texted their spouse asking if it was normal to feel this tired after doing nothing. The returning figure drove home alone again, radio off, replaying the silence more than the noise. They understood now that returns were not entrances, were negotiations with memory. In the weeks that followed, the moment was debated, edited, softened, and weaponized. It never resolved, just settled. Some fans stopped watching. Others watched harder, searching for meaning that might excuse how it felt. SmackDown continued, professional and polished, carrying a scar that only appeared under certain light. The returning figure remained, but never comfortably, never fully integrated, a reminder that some choices cannot be framed as stories without leaving something broken behind. Privately, doubt settled into everyone differently. Some felt complicit. Some felt relieved. Some felt nothing at all, which scared them most. The building still stood, the schedule still held, but the sense of inevitability was gone, replaced by caution, second-guessing, the awareness that damage does not always announce itself clearly. Years from now, people would still ask where they were when it happened, and opinions would still harden before empathy arrived. But the truth would remain quieter than all of that. That night did not give anyone what they wanted. It gave them what they had to live with. And the question it left behind was not whether it should have happened, but whether anyone had the courage to admit that some moments change everything by refusing to feel good at all.